What we call power speaker. You got one on your side.
I guess we can start. Well, good evening, everyone. It's nice to have you here. I'm very privileged to host this event along with this is the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies, along with the Urban Food Project and the Emmanuel Business Collaborative, and to welcome with us three very distinguished business people, young entrepreneurs, good friends. So this is an idea that has sort of like been brewing for some time, and we actually have talked about it and discussed it, and I'm very, very happy that we're able to pull it off and have a discussion, have a conversation. Not like, a very dry academic discussion where people just like doze off in the back and sort of like try to get their attention. But when we had this idea some months ago, and I was talking to Mike earlier, the idea was, how horrible things are with like an economic crisis, a pandemic, supply chain issue, a possible inflationary pressure. And those were the good old days before there's a horrific war that's taking place and this energy and everything else is becoming even worse today than it was then. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to have our three distinguished guests introduce themselves and then have a conversation. I have some questions, but I think we're going to have more of a discussion than just a choreographed question. Then open it up to the audience, and welcome my colleagues, Anne-Marie Pasquale and Adam Silver, who are here, to also feel free to join us in conversation, and then obviously the audience as well. So we'll start from the gentleman all the way to the far right and move forward.
My name is Mike Capos. My company's Down East Coffee Roasters. We're a wholesale coffee roaster importer, primarily selling to restaurants, cafes, universities, grocery stores, all throughout New England. So we have our proprietary blends, single origin coffees. We do a little direct to consumer on our website, and we keep the world awake one cup at a time.
Hi everyone, I'm Manny Franginakis. I'm one of the co-founders of 12 Points. We are a registered investment advisory firm located in Boston, Massachusetts, and we manage money. So we manage money for families, individuals, households, corporations, as well as foundations and endowments.
Hi everybody, thanks for having us here tonight. My name is T.A. Demoulas. I work with my family business, which is Market Basket Supermarkets. Just a brief history of the business. My grandfather immigrated from Greece in 1908. He returned to defend Greece in the Balkan War in 1912 and 1913. When he came back, he naturally gravitated to what he was most comfortable with, which was farming. And he opened a small slaughterhouse in downtown Lowell in the acre section, where there was a large wave of Greek and French immigrants at the time. In 1954, he sold, that's my great-grandfather, sold the business to my grandfather, and he continued to operate and grow the business until he passed in 2003. I currently work with my father and my siblings at supermarkets. We operate 87 supermarkets in 4 states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and Rhode Island. And I hope you all get the opportunity to visit them someday.
That's a lot of us have already. Thanks. So we hear about all the supply chain issues, the employment difficulties, food shortages, high energy prices. I mean, in your, to start with you, TA. I mean, what's the biggest issue that you're facing?
Yeah, I think. Like in our early conversations, Professor, there's two large challenges right now. There's inflationary pressures on cost of goods, and there's also employment issues. right? So just to begin with the cost of goods, everything is driving the price up, and we're super reliant on basically finished goods getting delivered to us, whether that's commodities like meat, cheese, milk, or eggs, or whether it's packaged goods that you buy on shelf-stable products from large CPG companies like Kraft Heinz or General Mills or Kellogg's Foods, right? We're very reliant on them getting finished goods to us. And right now there's an issue of A, them supplying the variety in goods that we need, and B, there's extreme pressures on costs, right? So, we've seen in several categories costs in the past 6 months rise up over 100%. And, it's a difficult balance because we can't immediately pass that cost right on to the consumer, right?
Yeah.
We have a duty and a responsibility to the communities that we operate in to protect the consumer's pocketbook and can protect their wallets. And, right, it's a balance. We hope that some of these costs of goods come down, but we all know that takes time and is highly unlikely to come back down to where the original cost of goods were prior to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. And secondly, there's the employment market, which is very difficult. Both full-time and part-time employees and associates are difficult to find and difficult to retain. And typically a part of our business where we weren't having much trouble for decades was the part-time employment. So about 75% of our employees and associates are part-time. And right now the retention is tough and the turnover is high. So.
I go going to your supermarkets, one notices that you don't have a lot of those automated stations. So like for you guys, probably this employment thing is even worse, right?
It is. I think we're more probably human intensive than most other supermarkets, right? Most supermarkets are looking to strip a lot of labor out of the stores and reduce expense. My father's been a big advocate of service, right? Whether that's service behind the deli counter, service behind the meat counter, or service at the front ends, at the cashiers and the baggers. My dad, has always been against self-checkouts. I think we'll get there someday. But he likes the human contact and he likes having associates service the customers. So, to answer your question, there's probably more associates on payroll than the average supermarket at Market Basket.
I think you can see it without it just being a customer. You can see that. Actually, I was in there with my son. He's like, I guess this is how supermarkets used to be. Like all those people have, right? There's a bagger and all the stations are open. So I think it shows. Yes, many. In your end, what do you see like as the bigger issue, like in your professional?
It's
world?
certainly supply chains right now, for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of the issues that we're currently facing were already in play prior to COVID and got even more exacerbated with the issue the crisis, I should say, going on in Ukraine. So it is a little bit of a hassle to kind of maneuver in this environment. Obviously, the inflationary pressures are extremely persistent, printing a 8.5% CPI in the previous month. But supply chains is the only thing that's really going to retroactively, bring prices down in some capacity. But there's multiple factors going on, including a reshoring process. So we went from an economy that was just in time to now reverting back to an economy of just in case. So we have, and when you take into account ESG, which has been on the forefront for the better part of the last 6 years, but is really coming into market focus over the last couple years, there's been a lack of investment. Now we're trying to move away from fossil fuels, but the idea of moving away from fossil fuels without having an infrastructure in place prior to doing so is becoming increasingly challenging. So we are probably living in an inflationary environment. The ratio of change, the degree of change will come down, so you won't print these high degree of CPI numbers going forward in the next 1 to 2 years. But the years of 1.8% inflation or sub 2% are probably not going to be with us for quite some time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you're probably going to see that all the way across the board, right? This inflationary pressure. It just seems that we're talking about it even outside. It's just like a matter of transferring over.
It's everything. And then we really haven't even so take it, for example, from fourth quarter of 2020, prior to, what's going on in Ukraine right now, which obviously is one of the largest bread baskets in the country or in the world, excuse me. You're talking about corn at that point was already over $5 a bushel at a multi-decade high. So now you're closer to $8 a bushel, and there's no real relief in terms of what we can expect, especially because we have no de-escalation and we don't understand what the long-term ramifications of sanctions will be at this point in time.
Yeah. So Mike, what's the biggest challenge in?
Yeah, I mean,
in your
I
world?
think we, our company would echo what TA was saying with Market Basket. I mean, the number one raw material that we purchase is unroasted coffee beans. Those are coming from coffee producing countries all over the world. And, coffee is traded on the ICE exchange, is traded on on an exchange. So those prices have increased obviously dramatically. They've doubled since last year at this time. But it's not just navigating that, it's all of the other costs that have increased, doubled, tripled, boxes, packaging film, gas to run our roasters, wages. So that, that's definitely the primary concern that we have as a company. And also secondary, or maybe primary is the labor market. Really difficult to find and retain employees. I know you've heard this a million times, but it's true. We're trying everything in the book. We're raising wages, increasing our benefits. It's getting a little better, I think. It's not as bad as it was maybe 6-8 months ago, but it's not great. I mean, you spend a lot of time hiring somebody, training them for a position, only to have them walk out the door some months later. So you've got to streamline that training process. That's one of the things we're trying to do, how to get people, up and ready and trained in the position quickly and efficiently, because you can't bank on them being there for 4, 5, 6 years. You'd like them to be there for that long, but it's not realistic.
So in your estimation, what's causing that employment shortage right now? I mean, from, you said you tried to raise your wages, other things that you've done, what's causing this employment shortage right
I don't know.
now? Yeah.
I definitely think there's a little bit of people, just reassessing their lives and saying, do I want to do this or do I want to do something else? There are a lot of interesting jobs out there. There's a lot of remote work. I think remote jobs have really increased pretty dramatically. You can't really roast coffee or deliver coffee remotely. You can do some office work and marketing and those types of positions, and we have introduced hybrid rules and some of those positions. But I think people are just trying to figure out what they want to do. And
So have we seen that shift in employment elsewhere though, Manny? Have you seen that in somewhere else? We've seen okay, we can't find employees for the service industry, but we can't find employees for the roasters. We can't find employees for the supermarkets. Is there employment bulging somewhere else, or is it just people just staying home? What's going on?
No, I don't think they're staying home. I think you saw a significant portion of the baby boomer market leave the labor force sometime in 2021. They're starting to revert back slowly. But I also think when you look at wage inflation, it's one of the stickiest parts of inflation. And look, we're all small companies here for the most part. It's really hard to compete with conglomerates that can add 30% to wages to retain and attract employees away from your own company or base. So I think there's a lot of that going on. I mean, you're seeing a lot of people take on a job for 6 or 7 months just to get offered a higher salary. Also, I was talking to a ton of attorneys recently, and recruiters are calling people hand over fist and saying, they're going to pay XYZ above what you're making. Are you interested in an interview?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem with inflation too, is that, from a wage perspective, we don't expect that to ever decrease. It's probably one of the stickiest parts of inflation.
Yeah. What's your estimation?
Yeah, and I echo everything that Manny and Mike have said. In a retail operation, right? We're bricks and mortar buildings. We have distribution centers and warehouses. they need people to operate, right? And they need associates, they need vendors, they need third-party labor help and delivery services servicing all these stores. And we saw an exodus in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and I think some of that stuck around when there was government stimulus involved, right? When there's government stimulus involved, there was a lot of people, not just in the supermarket industry, but in a lot of the retail industry that their payroll was being serviced by the government, right? And in many cases, they were getting paid more than they could get paid hourly at a part-time retail job, right? And I think a lot of those people that left the customer-facing retail business might have returned to the workforce, but not in a retail aspect. They might be, chasing wages elsewhere, or working from home, or working remotely, or doing some sort of hybrid schedule that's more appetizing to them.
Yeah. So which makes it even, yeah, Manny, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add to it. I also think that we're starting to revert back to how we're speaking to our younger base in terms of employment. I mean, when you look back over the last 15 years, nobody was going around telling people about like CDL truck driver licenses or, anything regarding trades.
Yeah.
That is starting to come back actually now because of the lack of labor that we have in certain fields. So I do think that there was a lack of investment in some capacity from our country in terms of how do we get, people into the right positions to make sure that we have a fast growing economy.
Yeah.
Because, what we saw during, even just take the tariffs that happened with China, when we were trying to protect intellectual property, due to the trade wars, we lost about 2,000 trucking companies nationwide, just due to that factor. So there are ripple effects that we are feeling now. And again, what we've experienced over the last, I would say even 18 months is just exacerbating the situation.
Yeah. So it's just like that ripple effect of the opportunity cost on something else that has to happen. But then it's all like, also raises the question of, what TA was talking about earlier. So like the trademark of something like Market Basket, that service that you strive for. So it's like, it's almost like it's forcing you to also to change in different ways. So like, how do you transfer this whole idea of understanding the global world and the global village and the global market structure to the individual, and how do you really provide that personal service still, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be a challenge.
Yeah. There's no question that we have to adapt, right? Just like any business throughout time, you have to adapt. And we've been a company that is obviously, reliant on people being in the store and servicing the store. We've also been very blessed to have a workforce that most full-time employees stay with us for a long time, right? It's not uncommon to have people stay with the company for 30, 40, 50 years. And I think what we're seeing now is employees or, people in general being chased to different jobs or wanting to do different things throughout the course of their work career. But getting back to your question, Professor, we've been able to change schedules and add some automation in our warehouse and add technology to our trucking fleet where, it benefits the employee, whether that's nights off, days off, weekends off, or a rotational schedule where they're getting more time at home than they are in the workforce. So, there's been changes throughout, and we're going to have to continue to make changes to retain the employee workforce.
Yeah. So, Mike, you're talking earlier as far as like the cost, how the costs are rising on not only just the importation aspects, but just the boxes that you have to buy. And do you pass that to the consumer, to your customer? How does that chain work?
Yeah, we've definitely had to pass it to the consumer. One of the interesting things in at least the coffee world is we've been able to get coffee easily. There hasn't been really a shortage of getting raw unroasted coffee to process. That's, for us, that's not really the issue. I know in the markets, a lot of times you'll go there and there's no paper towels that you want or other products. For us, we've been able to get plenty of coffee. We've been able to get packaging material. Maybe it's taken a longer lead time, but we're able to get plenty of product. It's just a matter of juggling all the different inputs that have risen so drastically. The coffee as a raw material being the number one, but as I mentioned, the packaging material. So juggling all of those things and trying to understand, how that's affecting our cost and how much we need to raise prices. And it's been significant. I mean, my grandfather started the business in 1953. My dad's been doing it for about 50 years, and he's never seen anything like this. I mean, we've seen the coffee market spike, a few times and gone to these levels, but combine that with everything else going on, and it's really chaotic. I mean, financially, you really have to, dig into the numbers and use our accountants and CFO to figure out exactly how this is affecting costs and just try to stay ahead of it. I mean, you can't sell a pound of coffee for less than it costs you, but obviously we're in business to turn a profit here. But I think TA mentioned, we do have a duty to try to keep prices somewhat stable and not, you walk in to buy that bag of coffee out of Market Basket, let's say, and it's doubled in price. You're gonna probably look around and try to find one that's maybe not as expensive. So, we did drag our feet as long as we possibly could. We do fix out, coffee contracts in the future. We do hedge. So we're able to lock in prices for, you can go out a couple of years if you want. Traditionally, most roasters go out a year and 18 months. So we were able to delay these increases, but now at this point, we're using coffee and materials that are at the top of the market, and those prices have to be reflected in our sale price.
You guys used, I heard this term a few times, and my students know I say that we don't use this term a lot. You use the term duty and responsibility to my customer. And I'm intrigued by that because, we talk about it all the time in a political sense. A lot of people don't talk about service or duty or responsibility, but, I heard it a few times. So how much of that drives your thinking? I mean, as far as your responsibility to your customer?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important in our business, right? And my dad has a saying, which is, we have to look out for the customer even when they aren't looking, right? We have to look out for the customer even if they don't know that we're looking out for them. And he says this to a lot of the department buyers, right? There's different buyers within each department. And what he means by that is when say the meat market goes up on beef, on cattle, right? Then it goes up 10% because there could be a disease out there, and that 10% price spike lasts for 2 or 3 weeks. There's different competitors out there that we have that immediately reflect that price in their retails, right? They raise the 10% like that, and they're going to maintain their margin. They have to report to Wall Street, and that's that. That's a case where the buyer has to make a conscious decision, and we hope that our company culture is ingrained in him to say, hey, don't raise the retail 10%. Raise it 1 or 2, or don't raise it at all. You just eat it for 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to come back down, right? And I think that's been an important part of our company strategy over the years, to try to be the low price leader in the marketplace. We have set customers' expectations to be there. Right. So we have a duty and responsibility for over the 105 years that Market Basket's been in business. And if we want to be the low price leader in the marketplace, we can't reflect these commodity spikes, right, in our retails. So, we try to look out for the customer when they don't know that we're looking out for them.
Yeah. Anyway, you must see that in your world too, right? Like it's personal.
Yeah, I mean, customer loyalty for me is a little bit different, but like to talk about just passing on increases, I think that most companies right now are. And I think the NFIB just came out with a study that for any company that hasn't passed on that cost increase to the customer, 9 out of 10 are expected to do so within the next couple of months. So I do think that it is going to get a little bit hairy as, companies get their margin, shrinking on a monthly basis almost. Yeah. And especially because I don't know if TA shares this belief, but I don't think we've seen peak inflation in terms of food realm. So
I think that's an accurate statement. We have several companies, large international companies that have taken, they might take 1 price increase every 2 years. In the past 6 months, they've taken 4 or 5 price increases. I mean, unprecedented, and I'm involved in the buying side of the business a little bit, And I've never seen a price on a non-commodity, on a non-commodity item. I've never seen a company take a price increase and then take a price decrease, right? Isn't it?
No.
10 years I've been doing it, I've never seen that happen. So, I think there might be some relief, but these companies are taking increases to cover their costs, and I think they're taking advantage of a lot of customers.
So when does this even out? Or, does it, what's the prospect here? I mean, like, are we like in just completely uncharted waters, or what's?
I think we are. I think especially when you take the Russia-Ukraine situation into account, we really can't forecast what these implications are going to be. Because if you look at, take fertilizer, for example, right? 3 main components: potassium, potash, and nitrogen. Well, potash is controlled by 2 main economies. It's controlled by Canada and it's controlled by Russia, Belarus. So we're talking about increased fertilizer across the globe. In particular, South America gets all of their fertilizer from the Russian Belarus region. So when you're talking about coffee and you're talking about the ability to plant future crops, it's really hard to forecast that because they don't know what cost increase that farmer is going to intake.
Yeah, they're not going to fertilize coffee when they need to fertilize wheat and, products that feed people.
And there is an ongoing fear of a potential food crisis. It's been talked about in the public media for the last coming weeks. But you're talking about, just recently in the last couple of weeks, Sri Lanka came out and said that we are going to default on our dollar-denominated debt because we actually have to put our capital towards energy resources and building up a food production capacity for our population base. The only country out there that is actually somewhat protected from this in terms of keeping kind of a defense mechanism is China, who's grown their wheat storage by 70% since 2008.
Oh.
So you're talking about parts of the world that could potentially be facing famine sometime within the next couple years, depending on how quickly this crisis gets resolved.
But I think that's probably a certainty. I don't think it's a probability. I think that's a certainty. And I think the next year or so, I mean, you'll see it, especially like you remember last year we had a very hot summer, very unusual weather in the northern hemisphere. So those yields are going to be affected. And then if you lose Russia and Ukraine from those source base, that you're going to see that, right? I mean, I don't think that's outside of the scope of reality. But you guys talked about the supply chain issue. So is that China as we all think, or is it something else that's going on as far as the supply chain argument?
I think China's certainly playing a factor. I think that right now it's probably getting worse if you look at it on a 6-month basis, just due to the fact that their lockdowns continue to increase. You're talking about now they're coming into the Beijing area of that country.
About 20 million people?
Yeah,
possibly?
I mean, that's just going to continue to slow down production. And again, we're in a reshoring process, but like to say that we're going to build semiconductors in the United States, well, that takes 5 years to build a semiconductor plant plus a $17 billion investment. So it's going to take time to be able to have a reshoring process. So we are pretty much self-reliant upon getting these products for some of these countries. And when you talk about, this transition in an ESG world to go from using carbon products to being carbon neutral, and the idea of having EVs on the world stage. We're talking right now we have 15 million electric vehicles in the world that are on roads. We're probably, to get to carbon neutral, we have to have 250 million EVs on the road. And you're talking about Russia and China controlling the largest products that go into these materials.
Yeah.
So if we are in a challenging situation, I do think that innovation will kick into gear, but we cannot expect things to go back. I don't think we'll ever see that 2019 world again. And I think it's going to take some time to reshuffle prices decreasing.
I think we're probably going to be nostalgic for the early 2022. Those good old days of 2022, when we had to deal with a pandemic and an impossible inflationary pressure. Are there any questions out there? I want to monopolize this conversation. Yes.
Mr. Dumas, can you share with us what's the rate of increase in profit in your company?
On the rate of increase on cost of goods or
No, for profits.
on profits? Well, I can tell you that right now, our average cost of an item right? Our average cost of an item is up about 6.5%, right? So that's across all departments. It's a blended average, blended weighted average. In our average retail is up about 6.2%, right? So, you know, depending on the weight of profitability per department, where it's really a net loss right now based on cost of goods. I'm talking year over year now, right? So it's year over year. It's right now we're running at a net loss of 10 or 20 basis points on margin.
It's kind of interesting because over in Europe, supermarkets and retailers have increased their profits by 5, 6, 7%, even though the threshold from price.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the key here will be maintaining our margin, right? So if you look at a supermarket, you say at the end of the day, at the end of every year, it's 3 or 4% industry, right? It's a 3 or 4% profit industry. Now, if we're maintaining that net profit margin off of these higher retails, we're going to generate more revenue, right? We're going to generate more profit. But the key is, you know, how do we compete with international companies, right? Like Walmart and Aldi and Lidl, you know, these they're great competitors and they have very inexpensive prices, right? So if we want to stay competitive with, say, Walmart, who we view as our largest competitor, we have to keep retails in line with them, right? And they have the ability to compress their margin a lot more than we do. Because they're generating profit in other areas of their business, whether that be electronic sales or auto sales or whatever it may be. You know, so it's going to be a balance, but I think first and foremost, the retail, which is most visible to the consumer, is most important, right? That is most important. The retail that's reflected on the shelf is most important to the consumer, and if we're not having parity with our other competitors, you know, we're in trouble and we're going to lose our edge. So I mean, getting back to answer your question, if we can maintain our margin, our net profit margin at the end of the day, theoretically, because we're grossing more higher dollars because the retails are higher. But you know, it's the more important thing is to maintain our customer base and make sure that our company culture and what our company stands for is primary.
Any other
Thank
question?
you.
Yeah, so, you know, many, what you were talking about earlier, not going back, I mean, do you all feel like this is a systemic sort of challenge that we're facing right now? This is not just a temporary little glitch, a little bump on the road kind of a thing, but this is like a bigger thing? So,
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be systemic. I think it's going to be multi-secular. We're going to have to pretty much go through an entire new cycle to figure out where we're going.
And when you're saying a new cycle?
I think there's going to be innovation. I mean, we're talking about, you know, with what we're seeing with food right now, I think there's going to be innovation that comes into play that will allow, you know, fertilizer and other items to be produced in other regions. And I think that, you know, you will come out with an idea of, you know, whether it's vertical farming or something else that will help, you know, ease tensions. But I think we're going to solely have to rely on innovation.
Yeah. Hey, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a question of thinking about the fertilizer, right? Because it's impacting when I read about dairy farmers here, right, and other agricultural farmers here. So I guess the question for Mr. Mullis, thinking about it with Market Basket, is to what extent has this affected who you buy, right? So with dairy farmers, for example, or poultry or cattle or beef, you have to. Or smaller businesses or smaller dairy farms that they're already in danger anyway here in the States, especially in Massachusetts, are they being squeezed out of the market because they can't compete at this point with shipping, or is that not an issue?
No, it is a very real issue. And I think, you know, over the past 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of consolidation, both from a retail side in the supermarket industry, but also from a manufacturing supplier side. So when you talk about poultry or beef, right, there's really 4 or 5 main suppliers that are FDA regulated that supply a lot of the beef and poultry in the whole country, right? So we're somewhat at the mercy of purchasing from them. We do a lot of business with local dairy farms, cheese, milk, and eggs, and those are isolated in pockets throughout our company. A lot of those don't have the scale or the volume to supply us. company-wide. So we deal with large dairy farms, and a lot of those are controlled by co-ops all over the country that represent, all these little individual farmers and control the prices. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know there's a tax, like I know Massachusetts, for example, there's a tax that helps dairy farming, dairy industry here, state, but I don't know if that, I don't know if it's just law in New Hampshire and how that affected your market.
Yeah, there's, the milk price is set every month, right? For example, the egg price is set every week, right? So we adjust retails based on that. And right now milk has gone through the roof. I think right now we are paying maybe $3.20 a gallon, selling it for $2.59, right? Yeah, and just go back 6 months, it probably cost $2.10, right? And that might be an exaggeration, but I'm just using it as an example. Right, so, but we're competing with Aldi, who might be selling it at $2.50, and Walmart, who might be selling it at $2.80. So, there's situations like that. Now you go to the state of Maine, there's a state minimum on what you can sell milk for. So I think we might sell it for $4.20 up there, right? So, there's different pockets that have different rules and regs. Yeah, but the answer to your question, like a lot of these large commodity-based items are controlled by large co-ops or very large international companies.
Yes.
Questions. I think I have two questions that's leading on to what was just asked. As you see the world now, and it seems like we're going to be entering something quite catastrophic, what are the strategic partnerships that you are creating now? Or do you feel like, well, we need to make some really special bonds now with however you see it, whether it be local, suppliers or other organizations that you think might help going forward to see it now as a priority? And then the other part of the question is, our student base are mostly first generation Pell Grant eligible students. Is there an opportunity for students coming right into the workforce, from just having an undergraduate? Because, usually in Boston, always think that everyone has a PhD, MD, etc. Like, is there an opportunity here for people with less experience to enter the workforce quicker, to apply? Vision of the future.
To answer your second question, yes. We're starving for labor right now. Anyone's going to open the doors. I do think that there's, I think we're relying upon our youth to be able to come in and jump full force. I think one of the problems with COVID that we've noticed, especially as we work with all corporations, is that because of this remote work environment, people have lost mentors. So I think they're starving for that. And I think that corporations are hungry to open their doors and bring in new associates.
Yeah, to answer your first question, what we saw throughout the pandemic and still currently going on is a lot of favoritism, right? So where companies have limited supply lines, right? They may not be producing all different sizes and all different variety. We would be told one thing by the manufacturer, right? Say, take General Mills, they would say, we have no 15-ounce Honey Nut Cheerios. But we would see 15-ounce Honey Nut Cheerios at Walmart, or we would see it at Stop and Shop, right? So we saw a lot of favoritism on probably relationships or on profit, right? If General Mills has the opportunity to sell Honey Nut Cheerios at a $2 cost, and our deal with them is contracted at $1.80, and they only have a limited supply of it, they're going to sell it at a $2 cost, right? So I think to answer your question, I think it's probably just improving relationships with existing vendors. And, a lot of these big food companies control a lot of the brands throughout the store, right? So you're really working with, call it 12 or 15 in your center store, in your dry grocery, there might be 12 or 15, large public companies that control 50 or 60% of the brands.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's interesting. So I was reading about this also with like shipping, right? Where companies would have a deal with a shipping company, and all of a sudden it might change based on what you're talking about, where they can get a better price somewhere else. And so I guess it's the question, and what's the solution to this? Is it just let the market play out in that situation, or is there a role for government in this way to protect? Right? Because I think what you're seeing is that a lot of small businesses or mid-sized businesses are really in trouble here, and that could be more detrimental to the economy if the government does not do something. be systemic change, right? It's a reorientation of the economy, right? So what is the role here going forward?
I mean, unlike what TA was saying, we have second and third suppliers for just about everything now, where we didn't before, just because we have to. If somebody's out of something, you can go to your second or third supplier. But to answer your question about, what do you do? Yeah, I mean, you hear these shipping companies are having record-breaking profits. So yeah, maybe there is a need for government to step in that case.
And it's not just had a story about almond farmers, right, in California, where the shippers are coming in, and they come into Southern California, they unload, and they're supposed to go to Northern California, but they're just going back to Europe, to Asia, right? And because it's cheap, it's better business for them, not even to take the almonds from California and bring them over to South America.
Right, to ship a container of coffee was about $5,000. Now it probably peaked around 15, 16. Now it's somewhere around 9, but they think it's going back up. So it's been pretty crazy.
It's like astronomical, like 300%, right? It was a
Yeah.
300% increase.
Yeah.
When we saw containers, my family's in food distribution. When we imported containers from Europe, we used to pay about $2,000 a container. We're up to about $12,000 a container now. So, and there's just there's a huge backlog as well. So even just getting the product here is becoming tremendously difficult.
Yeah, and that's what I was alluding to earlier about the supply chain in China. There seem to be like all these other like mitigating factors here. And it's almost like, if we talk about systemic changes, like what, just to echo a little bit what Adam was just saying, we almost have to recalibrate the way that we think about everything, not just like the marketplace, but even like, recalibrate even our assumptions we have about government, about politics, about how that works together. And we saw some of that even with the pandemic. And I think we probably have to do something like that and some kind of a combination when it comes to the marketplace too, right? I mean, like you guys, I don't know.
I think politics will play a huge factor in it. I think especially here in the United States, we do have the ability to be energy dependent. Diesel skyrocketing right now is because we're exporting most of our diesel. So I do think that if we do have there could be a political swing that we just say we're going to be self-reliant upon energy and we're going to take it upon ourselves and we're going to decrease inventory exports. So I do think there could be a political turn.
Yeah, and some of it, I think political and from, not necessarily the party structure, but how we engage with government, like how we engage with government. So like, it's almost like a recalibration of the last 40 years. So like a lot of our calibration of how we've grown up in the last 40 years is like that Ronald Reagan-like statement, like the five words that you don't want to hear, like I'm the government, I'm here to help you kind of a thing. So I think in some ways we have to recalibrate that notion because I think this is becoming like a lot bigger now than what we had dealt with before. This is not just a bad crop. We've seen this. This is not an issue of energy crisis. We saw that. So we saw like in 2006, 2008, we saw a bump in both, and we see like the Arab Spring kind of a thing coming up out of that, right? And this is making the Arab Spring seem like a walk in the park because there seem to be like all kinds of other things going on. So you need to shore up in some other ways, right? I mean, I don't know what your take is on something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of exposures, right? There's been a lot of eye-opening exposures where people, and especially Americans, took for granted getting a lot of ingredients, raw materials, packaging, transport, and the list goes on and on. And, everything was flowing smoothly until it wasn't. And it's eye-opening, and there's going to be a lot of resets and a lot of thinking in all these different industries and all these different areas. The thing is nothing is solved that easy.
No.
Yeah, but we realize how fragile everything is, the balance of everything. I mean, look, when COVID hit, our stockpiles of PPE that were, I don't know, 10 or 20 years before, we had huge stockpiles. We had like nothing because you can just order it and it comes from China and it's here until it's not, until you can't get it. Yeah. So I think, we're going to have to plan for this sort of thing to happen again.
Yeah, Joe.
Well, it's interesting as I listen through you talk and just kind of reflect on my experiences. and then again, I'll go back all through, and it's interesting, I've been going to Market Basket for 30 some odd years.
Thank you.
You know, literally, you know, before I had a family, while I had a family, now that I have family left.
Yeah.
It's really getting those same people back to the store for whether it's the $100 a week spend, the 200 to 300, you know, and here's Thanksgiving, so we're gonna get that, you know, that ticket one time, and it might be 500, but it's getting the people back to the store, the same people. So I actually like the fact that you don't have robots, that you have people, and I think it's great that, you know, there's all kinds of people who are backers of. There's special needs people, but there are all kinds of people, and what it really
Professors.
reinforces. Professors. They're qualified, but it reinforces the sense of community and how important community is. You know, and then when I think, so community and quality, because at the end of the day, the only way you're gonna get the loyalty of the community is if the service is there and the quality stays. And quality is always one of those things that we as a nation lost sight of it. Everything became transactional, everything became the lowest price point, and that doesn't go with quality, and it doesn't go with service. It goes, everything's commodity, everything's you know, the lowest cost point you get. You know, when I think of the roasters, I think it's fascinating because, you know, one of my other vices beyond I go to the Market Basket a lot and the young job is I drink a lot of coffee, and
he's a finance guy.
consistency of coffee, right? But when you think of coffee, you can hedge your price, right? As long as you can get it, you can hedge it. So price is the issue, but the quality of the bean is. And as around the world, the quality of the bean suffers because of lack of fertilizer or whatever the climate change is. Once that quality suffers, you might be able to deliver the coffee, but if people don't like it as much, it's not the taste that they want, they might look someplace else, right? It's the reemergence of Dunkin' Donuts, right? Because people say, you know what, I want to go back to the thing I like. I want to go back to the thing I remember. So it's the consistency of the product and the relationships you have to make sure that it stays that way, right? So the last thing you can do to one of your vendors is not deliver, right? But you can't deliver something that's inferior, right? So again, the community, when you think of the relationships, that becomes important. Then we look at Manny's businesses. Andy sells trust. He sells trust, and I'm going to do the legwork for you, but I'm really going to listen to you and understand what your needs are, what your goals are, and I'm going to help you get there. But I'm going to listen to you first. I'm going to let you talk, and quite frankly, it's building that rapport. And that rapport isn't I'm coming in and here are the things I want to buy. It's years in the making, right? And once you get there, you're there. And as long as you're telling them the truth and laying out the facts, they're going to stay with you for 30 years, 40 years, right? And hopefully the generational transfer goes down. So, you know, the 50-year-old son, you know, inherits money from the 80-year-old mother, and then it just keeps on going. That's nirvana for the business. But it all goes back to that sense of community. And I think we lost it. We lost it in the 90s. It got reinforced in 2000. We went to a global distribution network where you know what, relationships don't matter, but price does, right? Because I can always count the supply chain, and you can until you can't. And what we find out is we can't now. And you know, when we talk about food insecurity and access to products, you know, you want to work with your local farmer because you're reinforcing that sense of community. And they come to your store, you sponsor a Little League game, you've got the people selling cookies out in front, and that's what community is. Nobody says, I want to go to that great Walmart community, and I'm not dissing Walmart at all. It's a different model, right? But it's a price model. It's not a community model, right? And I think we're finding out now, and you can look at it all around the world. What's keeping Ukraine moving? It's the community. When you call it the community of NATO rallying around them, or the community of the citizens saying, you know what, not here, not now. This is ours. So if you lose a sense of community, and in each one of your businesses, however you define it, you lose yourself. And I think what we're seeing now is community is coming back, right? People say, I can't rely on the government because I don't believe they're going to help me. But I'm going to rely on my neighbor. I'm going to rely on my friend. I'm going to rely on the people who I see every single day around my town. And I think we're going to see that resurgence coming back through community, not through, you know, commodity pricing, right? Because I think you can't count on that.
Yeah, very, very well said.
So I think I can see it in each one of your businesses. So I'm just thinking, you guys think about community. I know the rules list or. Yeah. Well, I meant market basket.
That's right. No, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, very, very well said. I couldn't agree with you anymore. The sense of community, the sense of personal service, right? The sense of people, being there to serve other people is of utmost importance, right? And I think what we've seen over the past several years is you have Stop and Shop, Star Market, they get bought by a European PE firm, right? And the first thing that they go to is labor in the store, right? How do we decrease labor in the stores? It's the most, it's the largest expense, it's the biggest toll on payroll. How do we, how do we get out of the store? And you see the reflection of it in some family businesses, right? Like Publix, like Wegmans, and I'm focused on the supermarket sector right now. It's what I'm most familiar with, but you see unbelievable service and sense of community in employees in Wegmans, right? You see, Publix is an ESOP, but it's still controlled by the Jenkins family. Great sense of service, great sense of community, great sense of people waiting on people. And we try to emulate it, and we try to do the same thing at Market Basket, right? It's more so than price and quality. People come to see their butcher, they come to see the cashier, they come to see the person bagging their groceries, right? There's a sense of trust and there's a sense of community, like you said, and that's of utmost importance. And if we lose that, the business is gone.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, Joe. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that corporations have made money for the last 20 to 30 years. Our participant base hasn't. So like we're seeing the first time wages rise in 20 years, right? They've been stagnant for the longest period of time. And I think all of that is, changing now. And I think giving back to the community is going to be a huge focal point. I think that reshoring process is going to happen. I think that, that 30-year period of a deflationary environment is ending. And now, this was going to happen anyways by bringing everything home. But obviously with 2 years of helicopter money and more dollars chasing fewer goods, we're just stuck in a hairier situation.
I think that's up demand too for people who would want now.
Well, yeah, how much of that was pulled forward, right?
It's fascinating talking about mentoring, right? And it's really any business, any organization. People want and need to get mentored, especially young people. But what's hard is the natural mentors have retired, right? They said, you know what, I've been away from the people that I spent the last 30 years working with. So you lose that continuity of the lunch, of the walk at lunch, of do you want to grab a drink after work? All those things that became part of your environment, you lock them down, now people say, you know what, I found other things to do. So there's nobody now around who can mentor those younger people coming in, because all those people who have that great institutional memories, who have those great stories, how you can learn from anecdote, they're actually, they went away 2 years ago, and now they said, you know what, I'm 58, I'm not 58. Older. But they say, I'm 58, and now I don't really have to go back. Right. I found all these other things that make my life more interesting or valuable, or now it's about me. It's not about, oh my gosh, I got to do my 9 to 5 because I got to get benefits. Well, you know what? I found another way to do that. Right. And once people find that, all of a sudden we've got the gap. And I think that's the problem with employment. You've lost this whole great resource of people who say, you know what? I don't want to do it anymore. I had a conversation with a woman today where she said, you know what? I don't want to do it anymore. And you know what? I said, you know what? I understand. I don't want to do it anymore either, but I got to do it for a little while. But then those conversations are the ones that will never be had, because there's nobody, you're not around mentoring, you're not around, when the 22-year-old person gets to spend time with the 40-year-old person, just kind of kicking around things, at the end of the day, that's where the real value is. That's where the mentoring is. It's not, show me how to do this Excel spreadsheet. Usually that goes the other way around, right?
Yeah, it's not a formal thing. It's like mentoring by accident. It's kind of how most mentoring
And
happens.
now we don't have, I won't say what big bank it is, but, I was fascinated because a colleague was saying, oh, my wife works for a big bank. And they think they're missing the human interaction. So they created an online water cooler. So everybody's obligated to log in online, 3 times during the day and chat. And you're like, well, that defeats the purpose of the water cooler. The water cooler is there to chat about the people who are telling you what to do. So online and chat about it. Well, I might as well just quit. So the logic wasn't there, but the need is there, right? People need a way to interact. So I think you all got different challenges in it, but I think we as a group have to think about it, right? Because that's where the opportunity sits for all of us, to make our businesses better.
Megan.
Yeah,
And then
going back a
Professor-
little bit, there was a mention that this would be completely energy self-sufficient. I was wondering if your guys' opinion why that isn't the case yet and what can be changed in order to have that happen.
Well, I think part of it is that we try to go to a net zero carbon world without having the infrastructure. And what that did is we have started CapEx investment for every single one of our carbon companies. So we're already looking at a 30% decrease of supply by the year 2030 in terms of energy. So another factor is that we're exporting a significant amount of our energy across the world, where we could actually just be self-reliant if we wanted to. And I think a lot of that will transition back, but most importantly, we have to build this infrastructure first. If we're going to go to net zero, let's do it, but let's make sure that we have the infrastructure first instead of seeing prices fly off the hedges.
And Marie?
Yeah, so here at Emmanuel, in the School of Business, we teach you can do well by doing good. And we often actually use case studies about Market Basket in their summer of devoted employee action from a few years ago.
Mhm.
And my question is, that is indicative of the corporate culture. Obviously, you've already described it, family business handed down. And wondering if you think it's possible that you'll continue to have that longevity with your employees. Do they remain this satisfied? I mean, right now we're seeing the Great Resignation, we see the gig economy. People aren't really used to just working for someplace for a really long time. Do you anticipate that changing, or do you think it's going to come full circle and people will stick with you, continue?
Yeah, no, thank you. The short answer is I hope so. I hope it stays the same, right? But company culture is a challenge, right? In any company, to maintain culture for decades upon decades and have it be the same, whether it's good or whether it's bad, is very difficult. And I think what happened in 2014 is you had a lot of people, employees, associates, vendors tied to the company for a long time because there was such rapid growth in the 70s and 80s, right? You had the core group of people who started in the business, right? And a lot of the people that worked there, their first jobs, right? And a lot of people that didn't even attend high school, right? Just worked at Market Basket when they were 14 years old. And you've had these group of associates that started with the company when there was 6 or 8 stores, right? And then all of a sudden there's 15, 25, 35, right? And they're with the company until there's 80 stores. And there was a big employee sentiment, associate sentiment of, hey, we were part of this culture. We were part of this neighborhood grocery store. We were part of growing this and maintaining it, right? And that's going to get sold to a PE firm. How do we feel about that changing not only the trajectory of that personal associate's life, but also everything that the company stood for? And I think a big part of our employee retention is the profit sharing plan that we have, right? Where people are vested in the program a certain percentage over a certain number of years, right? So it is an incentive to stay with the company for a long time. So to answer your question, I don't know if we're going to be able to maintain the longevity of each and every employee, but I sure hope that we can continue to perpetuate the company culture, right? Because I think the company culture is what's most important. And I think even if we do have associate turnover or lower retention rates, but the company culture is still there, we can still get the same effect.
Keelan.
Thank you so much for taking this talk. I heard one of you mention this transition from ready just as you need it towards ready just in case you need to have it. So, we've sort of critiqued the whole idea of the supply chains, but we have to admit, this has made products cheaper, available to us faster, and it's allowed us to live very comfortable lives. But of course, there's a lot of problems with it. How much resilience do you see building into your systems going forward without having to cut out the expense and convenience, if that makes sense? Because I'm just not sure how much we're going to completely revert course. Autarky is a very hard thing to maintain. So what do you think the balance is going to be? Because systemic risks are here to stay, climate change being a big one. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you have to, we're not going to go all the way back, and we're not going to eliminate just in time, but you have to be able to plan for it. And you do have to have some stockpile and some contingency plans, and you have to be ready to go when you can't get XYZ product. So I think we just got kind of lazy and complacent, and you never really needed to do that. And now we've seen that you do. So I'm optimistic, and I think we're resilient, and we're going to figure it out. And when another country can't get the goods to the United States, some other country will figure out how, because there's money to be made, and with these problems open opportunities for other places and other models.
I agree. I think it's obviously you have to be optimistic. You can't expect that the sky is falling and that things are going to completely change course. But I do think that for certain aspects of our economy, there will be a reshoring process, in particular semiconductors. We've greenlighted a number of plants in the Midwest to be built over the next 5 to 6 years because we know that we can't rely upon China or different parts of Asia to get us those products in time or in the correct manner. So I do think, will we be getting, are we going to be growing, are we going to still be bringing clothing from Vietnam and shoes and different things because it's cheaper labor? Absolutely. But part of that too is that we've lost jobs by this offshoring process. So part of it, yeah, will products become more expensive here by reshoring it? Absolutely. But are we going to potentially create new jobs that are going to lift higher people and more people into, middle wage labor or the middle class? I think so.
Yeah, just to interject, I think it's that last part too that makes it the optimistic. We get into this discussion of offshoring and not reshoring, but we can't go back to the 1950s and production structure of the 1950s. The thing is, I think we have to move forward. So you want, the movement forward, not necessarily to go back to. It's almost like, the yesteryear nostalgia seems sort of like out of place. And it goes back to Danielle's point. How do you create, from an educational perspective, how do you create, the employees for that new economy, right? And I think it's the speed is a little bit off right now, right? The speed by which the economy is changing is not fast enough to the employees that we're producing right now to be absorbed in the new economy space. And the challenge is, how do you create this? How do you maintain a traditional value structure and still maintain that innovation? That's going to be the major challenge. But to go back to the smokestacks and to go back to that's not going to happen, right? So, and I think it's sort of you have to sort of change that. And I think that's going to bring the resilience too, Dylan, and I think that conversation has to happen openly in this country and not necessarily try to stroke constituencies and say, no, they're coming back. Those steel mines, we got to keep this going, or the coal mines. I think you're going to have to change the economy and do it in a smart way so you can transition, so you don't go from carbon to carbon neutral 2030. You have to feather it out, right, and not necessarily play to that constituency. I think I saw a hand up there. Yes.
So TA, I know you mentioned the importance of maintaining relationships with large scale vendors and also co-ops representing local producers. With this globalized supply chain and rising inflation rates, is there still any opportunity to allow small local brands to grow within the market basket community, like how Kate's Hot Chips and Ken's Sauce had their start?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the short answer is absolutely, right? We love working with local brands, as do many supermarkets and many retailers. Their ability to grow and scale and be distributed throughout our company is dependent upon them, right? On how much they can produce, how much they can provide, and what their transit is. But as you'll see in many of our stores, we might have a certain granola brand that's produced in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that's only in the 2 or 3 stores that we have in the Portsmouth, Exeter area, right? Or you could go on the South Shore to Rhode Island, where there's a local barbecue sauce that's made. It might be distributed throughout 15 stores. So, we are a national brand house, right? We like to have full representation of all the variety of the national brands. So I think that's what the consumer's expectations are. But there's always room to grow with local brands within our company.
Ted.
Question for Mike. Mike, your business, you're out soliciting for customers all the time. The belly to belly kind of disappeared these last couple of years as a result of COVID. I'm wondering if, number one, you see that perhaps coming back as we move forward. Is it a generational thing? You know, were you able to continuously, you know, you got to grow, you got to keep on bang. What effect did you have as a result of COVID?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, definitely when COVID first hit and nobody wanted to see a rep from your company in person, unheard of, to show up, you wouldn't be allowed in. But that didn't last that long, actually, and our reps were out for the majority, of time, still visiting their customers and still soliciting those that would see them. Maybe there was a 6-month time when they didn't, but we still are a very in-person business. We've evolved from my grandfather's day where 100% of new business was put on by a rep, a salesperson knocking down your door and trying to tell you why you should use our product in your restaurant or your cafe, to be more of a brand and digital marketing efforts and word of mouth and our consumer end of our business, which is selling in grocery stores and all of that, causing leads to come in kind of automatically without having to go solicit business. But we still, I don't view us getting completely away from that ever. We still want that to be the foundation, being able to meet people face to face. If customers that we've had for many, many years can still call me or my father on the phone. But so we still do that. I still think it's a big part of our business, but it's one aspect of growing, putting on new customers.
Well, I think this conversation can go on, and it will be even much better with the reception at the Fenway Room. Might be some beverages there that would facilitate this whole conversation. As you can see, they really enjoy the conversations. I'm really grateful to our 3 guests and for really having this discussion with us, because a lot of times, we theorize a lot of these things and we read them in the papers, but they actually, as you heard the last hour or so, that they, live them and they make those decisions. And I think the other thing that I think would be remiss on my part if I didn't mention this is like, you can just see, and Joe was talking about community, but you can also see the family structure in this and how the community and family and the unit moves forward, and that small family business of through generations is really showing through. And I couldn't be happy to have you guys here. And hopefully this is just an appetizer. We can have an event like this in the fall, and a bigger event, and have a couple of more guests with us at the time. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
I also want to thank the Urban Food Project and the Emmanuel College Business Collaborative, right? Did I say it right? And Kelly Smith here and Anne-Marie Pasquale for joining the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. A great effort all the way around. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.